Welcome to the MOGL podcast. I'm Tim Bryson, Director of Athlete Education and Compliance, and I'm the host of our show. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning community member, welcome back. As y'all know, the MOGL podcast is dedicated to educating all NIL athletes and brands on how to ensure compliance, how to maximize NIL activity, and how to make a difference in the ever-evolving NIL landscape. Today, we have another special guest as we get closer to the end of season one. This guest can easily be found on social media. You'll find this guest speaking nothing but the truth. As we said in previous episodes, we need more truth tellers, and this guest is certainly one of them. This guest today is also a nonprofit founder, someone who is a leader in the marketing space as well. But today we have her on the show to discuss a very important topic, to which we'll get to, of course, during segment two. Without further ado, the one and only Camber Clemence. Welcome to the MOGL podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
It's a blessing to have you here, Camber. How are you feeling? I know you're kind of down south, so the weather's different.
The weather is different. It's like 85 degrees here. It's nice and sunny outside. But that doesn't preclude us from other, normal winter things. My whole household is sick, so we're chilling over here today.
That's super love.
Yeah.
And much love and respect to everyone who's been on the show before. I think we have 12 guests so far, but your name is definitely arguably the coolest name that we have on the show.
Thank you. I hated it growing up because everybody got it wrong, and I'm sitting here like, what's so difficult? It's Amber with the C in front of it. It's not that hard. But there's a lot of Camber, Chamber, growing up. So when I was a kid, I was like, Mom, Dad, why couldn't you just name me Amber, like, for goodness sake? But really, I love it now. So
we love it too, and we're glad that you're here, Camber. And so we're gonna jump right in, yo. I know the conversation we had in previous weeks and was definitely ones that led to this moment. But before we get to that moment, really, opening that moment again, first want to learn more about your story. So segment one, Camber, what is your story?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I don't want to do a whole rundown of anything you could find on my LinkedIn or something. I'm a marketing professional. I work with nonprofits in the technology space right now. But honestly, I'm mid-30s. I'm a lesbian. I grew up in the South, which was totally not the place you want to grow up when you are a little bit different. I founded Cut Down the Net just about a year ago now. Christmas Day, actually, last year was the day that it kind of all came to fruition. And I, like I said, I work in marketing as my background. And as I learned more about sports, and specifically women's sports and college sports, and NIL was only, maybe 6-7 months old at that time, I just kind of felt compelled to take, my marketing background, but also my life experiences, the obstacles I've faced throughout my life, and try to create something where I can kind of take that away from others, or at least lessen those obstacles in life. So that's kind of how I got where I am right now as far as Cut Down the Net is concerned.
But as you think about how you got to last Christmas, almost a year ago today, there was definitely pivotal, if not influential, decisions that you made from growing up in the South, now living in the South, right?
Still in the South, right?
That's got you to where you are today. So what are some of those influential decisions or even pivotal moments that you think about now?
Yeah. So I tell this to people all the time is, so we moved from West Texas to South Florida when I was 14. And I had grown up in a small town in West Texas, Lubbock, Texas, which is more known now because more people know Texas Tech than they did then. But had grown up in a largely like white elementary school, very religious, very conservative. And we moved to South Florida, and I ended up at a school that was very diverse. As far as like backgrounds were concerned, religions were concerned, family dynamics were concerned. And for me, it was like this huge eye-opening experience because it was just opened up to all of these different, people and their experiences and their lives. And I also got to see, I say got like it was a good thing. It wasn't a good thing, but for me, it was to see a lot of inequity as far as like education was concerned. There weren't enough books to go around. You couldn't go on field trips because there wasn't enough money. We had security, and there was just all this stuff that I had never experienced in West Texas. And I tell people all the time that I truly believe that my high school experience, moving at that like pivotal moment in my life, completely changed my outlook on life. It, went from being like a very secluded kind of thing to like, holy cow, all these other different types of people and religions and experiences. And there's just so much that goes into life that I had not experienced previously. And so for me, I think that was a pivotal moment growing up. It was just like, wow, like I really have to learn more about what other people go through and experience, and how that causes other obstacles in their lives as well. And I was just talking to my kid about that like a couple of days ago, actually. But yeah, that for sure was probably like one of the most pivotal moments in my life. And I think that it made me a more nuanced and more open person to understanding just all of the other obstacles that you may never ever know about that exist in other people's lives.
So real. I think everyone, especially now, I feel like people are more mobile, right? Whether it's going out of state for college, moving in their mid-20s when they turn 30, whatever the case might be. But given environments might change, did sports stay the same? Did you still play? Did you play a sport growing up? Did you play a sport in Texas and in Florida? Never play sports?
So I actually never played sports. So I grew up with parents who were not really around. So there wasn't really anyone we would sign up for sports, and then we just would never end up going. We just didn't have parents who were present. I didn't play sports until I became an adult, and now I play them terribly. They stick me in right field on my softball team, and like I'm not allowed to do anything except stand there. So I didn't play sports growing up, but coming from West Texas, which was really it's hugely football, right? I mean, Friday night lights, like that's where it came from. And moving to South Florida, that's really where like it kind of opened my eyes up to all these different types of sports. And in West Texas, there wasn't a big emphasis on girl sports either. So moving here, it was like, oh, okay, there's life beyond football. There's basketball and baseball and softball, and there's girls and boys basketball, and then there's girls volleyball, and like just heavily involved in sports. And my school was a very big sports school. Like that's what you did. You went to games. You went to football games. You went to basketball games. You went to women's basketball games. You went to the softball game. That's what you did. And that for me, like I said, that's kind of where I started to really like learn more and get into sports, and it's been a pretty big part of my life since then, as far as like fandom goes. But as far as it changing, I mean, I think that there's been a huge change in the sports landscape just over the last year, much less the last 20 years since I've been out of high school, and that's really where I kind of got caught up. Was there's just so much opportunity, but I still feel like as far as like how people get that opportunities, we're still 20 years behind.
Yes, that's so we warming up, Camber. Let's not get there quite yet.
Sorry,
I'm gonna take the segment. We're gonna take it to segment 2, which is a conversation really around the relationship between NIL, race and gender, really NIL, or really inequity in the NIL space. But before we jump into the inequity conversation, take us back to Christmas Day, probably a little bit before then. Ideation phase. Then when y'all say like, well, obviously Christmas, we're gonna do this. Like what?
So
how we get here?
It's a long story. So before I get into the story, just really quick background. Cut Down the Net it's a nonprofit that's dedicated to serving female athletes specifically, but also any athletes that are in like any kind of underserved demographic, right? So you're Black, you're brown, you're Muslim, you're gay, you're masculine presenting, just really anything, beyond you being a white male athlete. And so we're dedicated to serving them within the NIL space, specifically around education. So everything about like what is NIL, foundations of NIL, to financial literacy, all the way through like all the marketing things that you need to know in order to take advantage of NIL. So that's where we are today. But how we got there was a very twisty, turny, topsy-turvy road. It actually just started as a newsletter because I was making these stupid memes during the NBA season. And a friend of mine, she was like, you should write a newsletter, just if anything, to have a place for these like ridiculous things that you make. I'd be sitting there watching a game and I hate Grayson Allen. So I'd make like some meme of him. And so that's really how it started. It was just like a basketball newsletter to talk about basketball. That's my favorite sport. That's the one I spend most of my time watching. Men's, women's, college, all of it. And as we started sending out more and more newsletters, we started writing more and more about college, and we started writing more and more about women specifically in college. NIL started becoming an even bigger factor in the conversations that we were having. And during the course of that, we started to kind of shift gears where it was like, okay, we're not going to really talk about the NBA anymore. We're mostly going to focus on WNBA and women's college ball, just to have someone else to talk about those, channels. And then there was a point where I was talking to my business partner at the time, and I was like, listen, I think that there's something, like, we were both marketers. I was like, I think that there's something that's missing within the NIL landscape, and I was like, I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it just feels like we're just throwing these kids into the deep end with NIL and just kind of expecting them to either get an agent, be that top 0.5% that gets an agent, or B, just figure it out on their own. And so we started to kind of think about like, what could we do in order to take like our expertise and our background, and also our entire huge network of people that we know from working in marketing for so long, and kind of leverage that to get some sort of information and education to kids like at the ground level, starting in high school. We ended up meeting with Miguel Diaz, who is the program director of the Miami Suns in Miami, Florida. They're an AAU program that's been around over 20 years. They've had WNBA players come out of their program. Most of their girls go on to play athletics at the college level. And I sat down with him one day and had coffee, and I was like, listen, I'm not trying to, necessarily do anything here. I just want to know from you, as someone who works with these girls who are determined, to go and play college ball, like, do you feel like this is something that's missing? And we had a really long conversation about the NIL landscape, specifically as girls were moving into college, and what he felt his program was missing, and also just from a high school perspective, what programs were missing. And it was that they didn't have the resources and they didn't have the time to focus on NIL or personal branding, even though that was quickly becoming a really important part of the recruiting process. So that's kind of when things shifted for us. So we worked with Miguel and I worked with their team one-on-one. I still work with some of the girls from the program now. And so we would, have conversations with them and webinars and workshops, and we were going to their AAU tournaments and just anything that we could do to help them out. One of the players, she wanted to put on a basketball clinic for underserved kids in her community. So we helped her do that. Just anything that we could do to help them like come into who they are as players, figure out social media, press releases, media relations, interviews, just really whatever we could do. But at some point it became so hard from a time perspective. Once the AAU season was really up and running and they're traveling all the time, plus they have their own personal things, it got harder and harder and harder to do it in person. And so that's when we made the switch to, okay, well, now what we're going to do is how can we scale this up, and how can we make it available to kids wherever they are in the United States or across the world, really, but wherever they are in the United States, they have access to information and education. And so what we're building now is it's called Fundamentals, and it's the academy portion of Cut Down the Net. So that academy will be full of evergreen and continuously updating content with tracks around, like I said earlier, financial literacy, personal branding, data and analytics for social, really every single thing that you need to know as you start to take advantage of the NIL landscape, whether you're in high school, because there are so many states now that do allow that, or college. We currently are partnered with Northwestern Mutual to do financial literacy work, and you can also work with them one-on-one to do, like if you need personal advice. And then the same will be true for a couple of other things, especially when it comes to contract and negotiations, being able to connect people with lawyers or agents in the space to be able to run things by them. And so that's currently where we are. We're building the academy right now, thanks to some very lovely people who are willing to do pro bono work for me. Because otherwise I would never, we're a nonprofit. I don't have millions of dollars in seed money. I have a regular 9-to-5 job. But yeah, so we're in the trenches right now trying to build that academy and hope to have it launched by summer.
I cannot wait for the academy to launch summer
I'm very
23.
excited.
For sure. You got my support and MOGL support as well. Though the question that at least I kept delaying to ask, and I think we're at the moment now to really ask and unravel this a little bit more, is that when people talk about NIL, at least in my experience, NIL education, it's primarily 60-minute keynote speakers who don't have a clue about what the college athlete experience is in 2022. When people talk about inclusion or diversity within NIL, it's primarily centered on gender identity, not recognizing in race, mental, sexual identity, et cetera, right? And so you have been very deliberate, not just deliberate, very explicit in saying it's more than just gender, right? There's the intersecting identities, but also intersectionality, particularly at the NIL education's intersection, if you will, that we need to be centering education. How did you, right, as a white presenting woman, get to that point to where like you're leading voice in that way? Because we need more people saying like it's more than just gender, it's other things too.
Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, I think that the main thing that we have to remember in the NIL space, regardless of what we're doing with whatever work we're doing, is that we're centering the athletes, right? So ask them what they need, what they want, where they're struggling, what opportunities they have, and that's part of where that came from. That urge to make sure that not only did my nonprofit present outwardly that we were diverse, but also that our content represented, all different walks of life and different demographics, and recognize that it's not just male or female that impacts your ability to get NIL deals. It's anything and everything at this point, right? So part of that is by talking to athletes and talking to them and finding out like what they personally are struggling with it. Some of it is reading like the ESPN article on Jonquel Jones, who's, last year's MVP, but she's Black and she's gay. And she's, she said herself, not only am I Black, but I'm dark skinned. Not only am I gay, but I'm masculine presenting. And it's so much more than just she's Black, she's gay. There's all this other stuff that kind of comes in behind that. And so you read that and you're like, this is a person who's playing at a professional level, who is an MVP, who's an incredible basketball player. And she just got like her first big deal this year. And I'm sure you've seen the State Farm commercials, where she's handing tray. That's like the one thing, that you could probably name from her. So those two things, but also I think, if we go all the way back to my high school experience that I mentioned earlier, I think I just have also learned that there's so much more to stories and there's so much more to life than people could ever speak on. There's so many more obstacles that people face, and you don't know anything about that, so specifically, like, especially when it comes to the education component within the academy, it's really important for me to have not only just a track on like building a personal brand, but for instance, like, let's say you are Black. Okay. So now it's like, how do you build a personal brand unapologetically for who you are and not feel like you have to like whitewash who you are in order to get a deal? How do you, as a lesbian who's masculine presenting, or how do you even as a lesbian who's very feminine, who maybe doesn't come across as a lesbian, like how do you navigate that from a, an NIL brand deal experience? And so it's just very important for people to feel like not only are they getting a general education on what they can do, but specifically if they have something that might be like untraditional of them, and I mean to say that with air quotes, I don't know how else to say it right now, that it is not a disadvantage And if anyone ever sees it as a disadvantage, that you know how to handle that situation and ensure that you're not taking deals that are going to take away from who you are at your core.
It's well said. I think we've seen an increase of these college athletic departments, these athlete development educators, center humanity. I think it's been a core theme in my life the last several months, by center the human part of the college athlete experience, whatever. People are doing that within the college athletic department space, some more than others, but it's being done. Over in the NIL education space, a lot of NIL educators are working, including myself, are working for companies that are for profit, right? There are some companies that are obviously bottom line is super important, but they're not driven nor rooted in education like higher education institutions are as well.
Right.
Given there's a lot of noise with different companies jumping up, right? Trying to get into the space, position, etc. Your organization is called Cut Down the Net. But how have you, I've been waiting to use this the entire time, cut through the noise of all the mess that's happening around us and within the space to really be impactful and deliberate in what you want to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that something that I talk about a lot is that there are always going to be people who, right, wrong, or indifferent, want to get in on the ground level of something. And NIL is one of those things. It's been something that we've been talking about for years and years. There are going to be people who, are in it for the right reasons. There are going to be people who are in it for the wrong reasons. That's capitalism for you, baby. That's just how it goes. But as far as like what we do differently is, one, we're a nonprofit. To be completely transparent, we did start as an LLC. With the idea that we would do more consulting work. But once we started talking to athletes and their parents or their caregivers or coaches, it kind of honestly just felt gross for us. Like it was like, I don't want to take advantage of these girls, gain their trust, work with them, and then be like, well, when you get this contract, make sure we have 10 or whatever, just, it didn't feel like that was really who we were or what we were working towards. At the end of the day, it's really just about ensuring that people have access to everything that they need. So cutting through the noise for us is really just about being super authentic. And like we just did I have a new social media girl, and we just did like an exercise on brand voice and tone. And the thing that just kept coming up over and over again was that we are just completely unapologetic in what our beliefs are around inequality within the space. And there's zero hesitation on my part to make that loud and clear. And I think that kind of sets a little bit of a different tone for our organization. And, at the end of the day, this is what I feel like I'm kind of called to do. And if if it never becomes anything big, but I impact one or two kids, then my job has been done. But I really just think it comes down to just being super authentic in my beliefs and speaking on the things that I think a lot of people try to tiptoe around, and just unapologetically presenting, where we fall on the spectrum as far as NIL is concerned.
Camber, I'm rocking with you, walking with you, working with you, whatever you need from me, I'm with it. I'm with it. Let's burn it. Let's burn it all down. But speaking about the fundamentals, right? The academy is coming, but also the future of Cut Down the Net. How can those listening to the podcast, or maybe even watching to the podcast right now, best support you in the org moving forward?
Yeah, so I love that question, and I want to be really, really clear that there are so many different ways that people can, get involved or support what we're doing. If you're an athlete and you have an idea, or you notice that there's something missing, in what you're doing, reach out to me and say, hey, I think this is a really big gaping hole. And I wish I had more access to XYZ. Please let me know. Like, that is the only way. Like, I'm not a student athlete. I'm not playing, ball at any level, so that's how I, get this information, and I know what you need more of. So that's really important, first of all. Second of all, if you work in NIL or marketing or branding, or, you have a background in contracts and negotiations, and you want to create content, we are banking content right and left. It's video content that will go up on the site when it's live, and you want to participate in that. I am like bullish on ensuring that there are multiple types of people doing this content. I could do all the marketing content myself, but I'm a white girl, like you don't want to, like if you're a Black girl or you're a Muslim woman or you're whatever, you don't want to see my face telling you what to do over and over and over again. You just don't, because you don't
Mhm.
feel like you can connect with me on that
Exactly.
level, because I have a different experience than you. So I'm
Yep.
bullish on ensuring that there are people from all sorts of different backgrounds creating content. If you want to eventually mentor girls, please let me know. I also need more board members. Like, we're a nonprofit. A lot of people are not loving getting on board and having to volunteer, but that's just how it is in the nonprofit space. And at the end of the day, too, if you don't have time to do any of that, you don't have interest in doing any of that, just honestly following along with what we're doing and, like keeping us top of mind, when things are
Hmm.
happening, or, you want to share something, or just being able to kind of just engage with us is also super important. The more people that know what we're doing, the more people that know what we're doing. And that's super important for any startup, much less a nonprofit startup.
1,000% agree. 1,000% agree. Yeah, and I don't know who you know down there at Camber, but I just saw Duncan sign like 24 athletes to deals.
Hmm.
I've been trying to get Duncan on my team as an influencer. Well, sign me as an influencer for like 3 years.
Yeah,
So if you know anybody down there that can get me connected to Duncan Corporate,
I'll work on it. I'll work on it.
we'll add them
I'm
as a
gonna
presenting
write it
sponsor.
down right now.
I'm so serious. No, but they'll be a presenting sponsor, providing coffee for the academy, hopefully in summer 23. But
Yeah.
segment three action
Yes.
items. So again, this has been an introductory conversation.
Yeah.
One that I know will continue to spark more. I love this word deliberate. I think intentional is overused, but
Hmm.
deliberate conversation in regards to what we should and could and need to be discussing and support all college athletes in the ecosystem.
Hmm.
But what are 3 things you want our audience to remember and to leave with after our time together?
Yeah. So we didn't get into this at all. But the first thing that I want, especially anyone listening who's not a student athlete and is just kind of keeping track of the NIL space, is that NIL definitely serves a higher purpose for so many athletes beyond like the fame and the fortune that a lot of naysayers of NIL like to kind of like hem and haw about. It also definitely serves as like a stopgap for a lot of athletes who don't have full scholarships or don't have scholarships at all, which is more than you probably would imagine. I think only 57% of D1 athletes have full athletic scholarships. So there's a good contingent of kids out there who don't. And you have, like I said, no idea what their life needs are. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, is NIL serves a lot of purposes. Um, the second thing that I think that I would want people to take away, specifically as student athletes, is that any deal worth doing is a deal that amplifies who you are at your core, not just a person and not just as an athlete, but like who you are as a human. And we touched on that a little bit earlier. But that's incredibly important. You're so much more than, whatever ball you have in your hand. And then lastly, I think this ties in just kind of with everything we've talked about today, is that as student athletes, you have to be willing and able to advocate not only for yourself, but for others and for what you believe in. So, speak up about the inequity and be willing to speak on names who may not otherwise like get a seat at the table. And always, always, always do what is best for you. So those are probably my 3 things for sure.
That's good, yo. Super good. And what's next for Cut Down the Net? We know that
What's next for
summer's
Cut Down the
coming.
Net? Yeah,
What's
summer's
next?
coming. Summer's coming. So really what's next for Cut Down the Net is I would like to bring on a couple more people to help out with events. I would love to have a presence at March Madness beyond just myself being there to enjoy the games, but would love to be there more as like a media presence and kind of be able to get ourselves out there. Long-term vision is not only having a fundamentals online academy, but also doing courses at colleges and being at AAU tournaments and kind of being able to put a face to the name. But honestly, right now we're taking it day by day and just trying to ensure that like everything we get up on the website is super intentional, super deliberate, and the absolute best information that we can give to these kids.
Love it. I love it. Before we head out, yo, anything else you want to share with the people today?
You can find me on social media. It's at official_CDTN on everything. And I don't know if you're going to put it in the show notes, but my email address is camber@cutdownthenet.com. If you have questions or you have suggestions, please, please, please email me. I'm always open to listening. And I think that's it.
I will definitely include both Cut Down the Net social, but also the email in the podcast show notes. Camber, it's been a blessing.
Thank you, Timothy, so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Not Timothy. You can't call me. Listen, Timothy.
Okay, Tim.
Timothy is my like academic name, my money name.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Like, it's all love, though.
It's all love. I'm gonna call you TFB. It's fine.
Yeah, I gotta get you on Walk with TFB for sure too.
All right.
We say a little bit more on that podcast, but for everyone else, so thank y'all for tuning in to the MOGL podcast. Definitely connect with Camber. I'm going to Cut Down the Net community as they are not next. I mean, the moment is now, right? So get on where you can. Don't wait. Buy stock now, right? Invest now. Walk with them now, because again, they're poised to do some phenomenal work moving into 2023 and beyond. I look forward to having more conversations to help all NIL athletes get paid, make a difference, and build their brand. But as always, until then, get MOGL.